Guys, it's Z here again, and on this week's episode, I'm going to be going over 10 mistakes for indoor growers to avoid, and that I wish I knew earlier. So let's make sure we're recording. Everything's good. Hold on. Yeah. I need another hit. The first thing that I wish that I knew, the first mistake that I made when I was getting into growing was overwatering and underwatering. I'm going to group these two into one subject, even though they both deserve a good amount of time. So, watering your plants sounds a lot simpler than it is, but it's actually one of the most common mistakes for all beginner growers. And automated watering systems aren't ideal for organic growing because you don't want any runoff with no-till pots. And each pot demands different amounts of water at different times. Blue mats are a worthy option as they are ceramic carrot that reads the humidity of the soil and then maintains that ideal humidity by only allowing water in when it gets a little bit too dry. And then it stops letting water in once it's saturated. I think I'll try this option soon, but right now I can't really afford it, and a lot of experienced growers still choose hand watering, so they can be more in tune with each plant. So the question is, how do I know how much water to add by hand? For my first few grows, I thought it was experiencing deficiencies, but it was really just a total nutrient lockout from overwatering. Back then, I was still using bottled nutrients, so I was aggravated that after all my effort, each watering, getting the perfect pH and mixing, and then I started adding more nutrients thinking I was correcting the problem, but by trying to add more nutrients I had to add more water, and that actually ended up worsening the issue. I was devastated to see my plants suffering, so then I went polar opposite and started waiting too long to water, and a couple plants drooped over and then came back a few times, but one time I waited too long and I ended up losing 2 plants just from letting them dry out. The buds were never the top tier when I was having these issues because even if I got things kind of in check, by the end of the grow, the plant's poor health was transferring to the end product. So, just to say don't do too much or don't do too little is really easier said than done, and that's why I really want to explain this to you. Eventually, I got it down with bottled nutrients and my plants started to look a lot healthier. All I had to do was change my watering techniques. So, again, there's no exact answer to how much water you're going to want per plant, as there's so many variables such as your pot size, your plant size, and your climate. Also, there's others, and there's multiple answers to this question, because if you're growing with bottled nutrients, you want your medium to nearly dry out before watering again, and then when you water, you want to make sure that there's some runoff to rinse off any salt buildup from the last feeding. But with organics, if things get too dry, you'll actually kill the beneficial fungi and stuff living in your soil that you work so hard to create. So you don't want living soil to ever fully dry out. But you also don't want runoff with organics, so overwatering can be just as harmful, if not more, because it can lead to fungal issues and it will create an anaerobic environment that will start breeding harmful bacteria that combined will kill your plants and your roots and to damage your soil's microbiology. The first thing to do is to pick up your pot when it's dry and it's just full of soil, even before you have a plant in it. Get used to that weight and use that as your max low point. Then water the point just to where there's a tiny bit of water leaking out the bottom, and take note of how much you add it. With bottled nutrients, just mark that down and basically do the same thing each time, because like I said, you're going to want a little runoff to wash away any salt buildup from your bottled nutrients. But with organics, you want water just before it's getting any runoff. So take note of how much water it took to get runoff and then add a little bit less until you stop getting any at all. Now that you're used to your pot's weight, you will know when it feels light. This is the best way to truly know each pot's needs, as you may need a little less for each plant, so the needs still differ. The easiest way to know when the pots are ready for water is to simply lift them up, and you can feel how much lighter certain pots are, and judging by the lightness of them, you'll add more water to the lighter pots. Get it? Another easy way to know if you can't lift up your pots is to stick your finger into the first knuckle. Now, this is a good barometer. It's not quite as accurate as lifting up the pot, but this will do a great job. And if you're sticking up to your first knuckle and it's still dry, it's time for water. But if you pull your finger out and you got a nice coating of soil on the tip, that means it's wet enough and it's probably fine. With bottled nutrients, like I said before, things can get a little bit drier between waterings. You'll end up watering more often because inorganic growing mediums don't hold much nutrients of their own, and they also don't retain water the same as organics. So you may end up watering every day when the plants get bigger. With organics in living soil, you never want things to get drier than a wrung out sponge. So in the beginning, I'll sometimes go 4 to 5 days before needing to water, but once the plant's roots fill the pots, it'll be more like 3 days, and then towards the last few weeks of flowering, it'll be about 2 days. But despite that, I don't have to battle pH numbers every time I'm watering, so the choice is yours. Do you want to do less work up front or more work during each watering with the bottled nutrients? Or do you want to do more work up front and just add clean filtered water? It sounds more complicated at first, but I believe organics is actually the simpler method because it gives you more time for your plants while they're growing and less headaches adjusting pH. Number 2, now you've figured out how much water to give your plants. This is another mistake that I used to make, was watering the root ball. Make sure you don't water directly over the main stem, because this will actually destroy your roots. You never want to water right below the main stem. You want to be between the main stem and the outside wall of the pot. You want the roots to reach out for the water and fill the medium, so envision them trying to reach for the water rather than just pouring it right where they are at. Another good way to prevent this is to make a small mound like a volcano around the base of your main stem so the water gets channeled between the main stem and the edge of the pot. Make somewhat of a moat here. This will also help it from leaking out the sides of the pot. You should also water each half of your pot separated by about 10 to 20 minutes in between each watering, and only do about a half moon around one side of the pot at a time. Then wait 15 to 20 minutes, and then water the same amount to the opposite side of the pot. This ensures that you don't drown the roots, and it gives the water time to evenly disperse into the soil before you add more, so you don't drown your worms and you allow time for them to find their most comfortable spot. If you water too fast, it will just leak out the sides of your fabric pots and you won't even end up absorbing it into the medium. Number 3, the third biggest mistake I made was setting the humidity too low. I used to set my humidity so low that my plants were showing deficiencies because they weren't breathing properly because my VPD was way too high. So even after I got my watering down, got everything else down, I was wondering, why do these leaves look so yellow and struggling? They were just too dry. Some strains are adapted to a drier climate, and you could either select strains that can handle a drier environment, or you can increase your humidity to get into the ideal VPD ranges that's gonna be good for basically all plants. One thing that I like to use is these Govee sensors that I have. They check the room's conditions and it even charts the VPD for you throughout the day, so you can dial in each stage of growth to give the plants their most ideal environment. And by using a VPD chart as reference, I try to aim for around 0.8 to 9 kPa during seedlings, to around 1 to 1.3 for early veg and into early flowering, and towards late flowering I'll be up to about 1.4 to 1.5 kPa. So that goes into number 4, is where I want to talk about VPD and airflow. To increase the humidity, you're going to want to make sure you increase your airflow, and that's why I have so many fans in my grow room. 2 floor fans, 1 wall fan, and a small fan for each one of the grow lights to prevent hot air pockets from falling in each one of the tents. And that's also included with an exhaust and an intake fan. The 5th mistake I made was setting the temps too low with LEDs when I switched from HID lights. The old style indoor growing tells us to keep temps below 80 degrees, but this was just because HIDs heat the leaf surface more, so you want to keep the temps lower than So you want to keep the temps lower when using high pressure sodium or metal halide. But LEDs not only run much cooler, they also don't heat the leaf surface as much. So in order to achieve proper nutrient uptake, especially calcium and magnesium, you want your LED rooms around 78 to 84 degrees, with the lights on, and around 7 degrees with lights off. 70, sorry. I think I need some tea, sorry. Okay, number 6. One other mistake that I used to make was running the lights during the day. It's much easier to maintain temps at night, and it just makes it easier to keep things cooler during the night cycle too. And it actually helps me a lot in New England. So for instance, in the winter, if I was to have my lights off at night, I'd have to increase with some kind of heating system where I actually want my heat to go low for me to go to bed at night and just my grow room to be heated up. And in the summer, it works the same way, because in the during the day it would be too hot out. If I was combining the lights with the summer heat, it would just be really hard to struggle to fight that. So it also helps you maintain the conditions in the room easier, and it also allows me to basically free up my daytime. So I'm not worried about the plants during their night cycle, which is all day, and then late at night I can wake up in the middle of the night and go check on them and do stuff that, stuff at hours that most people aren't operating, and that enables me to still have a normal day and then also be able to work on my plants at night. Oh, another good benefit is that if you have a variable electricity rate, it will actually be cheaper at night, because when there's no demand, the electricity rate will go lower. So around 2 to 6 a.m. the electricity is actually a lot cheaper. So you could end up saving money by switching to a night cycle as well if you have a variable rate. So number 7. This is a mistake that I luckily never made, but I just don't want to see anybody make it themselves. And it's just a precautionary level, is just to keep all your outlets off the ground. I've seen others do this, and when I look at some videos on YouTube, I see people's wiring just a mess, and it's like all over the ground, and I'm horrified. I'm scared of a fire, and I just hope that they are very good with their hands, because I know I spill water all the time, and I don't know how they're not. I don't know how they're doing it. So anyway, you don't want any chance of an accidental spill turning into a much more serious accident, especially if you're not around when it happens. That's why I make sure all my plugs and outlets are at least 6 inches off the ground in my tent, and I ran the extension cords to the very top of the tent where things are the driest with anything that's plugged inside the tent. Number 8. One of the biggest mistakes that I made early on was not training my plant. But I wouldn't really call that a mistake, because it's more or less something that you learn, and I didn't want to just go pinching off the top of my plant on my first grow. That would have been scary as hell. But the more you get into it, the more you realize how resilient these plants are. So I would suggest starting small. Just let the plant grow first. See how the plant grows and understand how the intersecting branches come out. And then once you get a grasp on that, that's when you'll have a better idea on how you're actually going to train the plant, because now that you see where those big broadleaves come out and then an intersecting an internode will come out, that's going to be a new top if you remove your existing top. So you have 2 broadleaves here, and you take off this top, now you have 2 internodes that are going to become 2 new tops. You let those grow up and you top those again, now you have 4 tops. You do that again, you have 8 tops, again 16 tops, and then 32 tops. And you only had to do that 4 or 5 times, and all of a sudden you have a massive bush. And that is how people are filling out the trellis net. That's how you get a maximum yield indoors with a small plant. With a grow light. Because when you're growing outdoors, you do want to maybe top it once or twice, but you're not going to create that even level, because the sun can hit it at any angle and it's going to be pretty much just as strong. Whereas with a grow light, the intensity is only the strongest on one even plane pretty much. So you want all the plant material to be concentrated into that one plane. Number 9, this is a mistake that I would make. when I was first getting into trimming was over trimming and overtraining. At first, I got into lollipopping, which was basically removing everything except for just the top of a branch to try to make it catch up. But I found that actually slowed things down, and that branch would actually struggle to catch up because now it only had those 2 little leaves up top to try to grow with. But if you just removed the inner nodes on your way down that branch and you left those big broad leaves, that's going to give give that branch enough energy to send to that top of itself, and then it will actually stretch out and catch up. And I've seen much more success with the inner node trimming than I have with full lollipopping, and it definitely helps the plant not get stunted. And another good rule of thumb is to never remove more than 1/3 of the plant's leaves at a time, and you shouldn't really trim it more than every week or so, or 2 weeks if you're going to trim that much off, because otherwise you're going to really just damage the plant's ability to photosynthesize and maintain a healthy just maintain its own health. Number 10. This is not number 10. Last but not least, it is essential to automate your space as much as you can to control the climate and also try and make things as self-sufficient as possible. I use an self-sustained, I should say. I use an air conditioner in my window for the summer that hooks up to Wi-Fi, so I can control it everywhere that I am. Wow, I'm out of breath from taking that bong rip. Okay, and so I control it anywhere that I am, and I can adjust the room if things get too hot. Now, I've been researching the most efficient heaters that are best for grow rooms, and I finally found one that I'm able to purchase that only runs 400 watts. I'll throw that in my Amazon Sorry, I got burps. I'll throw that in my Amazon list below. But it's starting to get hot here, so I probably won't need to purchase that until next winter. But this winter, I struggled, and the 1500 watt heater draws way too much power to use. I'm also going to install an AC Infinity window fan to continually draw fresh air into the room and keep the plants healthy. Before that, I would just kind of vent from the rest of the house, but I think the constant fresh air will benefit the plants a lot more, and CO2 isn't really necessary for me when I have plenty of free fresh air out my window. Plus, I don't want to risk suffocating myself when I'm growing indoors on a small scale. I'm not in any rush. I got 3 cycles of growing, so I can harvest every 3 to 4 months. I don't need to push these plants any harder. I want to know what they can do with the natural things that they need. And the reason why most growers use CO2 is because they're in a sealed grow room and they can't pull air from outside. But I don't use carbon filters anymore because it's legal, man, and I'm smoking all day anyway, so people can smell it. I'm not afraid to hide any smells. As long as nobody can see inside your windows, then you're good. Just make sure that you're getting fresh air, and those plants are going to be happy. CO2 supplements usually are just because you're not able to get fresh air into the room. And if you can, then there's no need for the CO2. Yes, you can increase your yields with the CO2, but is it worth risking your health? I don't think so. I don't want to not be able to go in my room for more than 20 minutes. That sounds weird to me. So that kind of took me on a side rant. But anyway, to maintain the temps in the room, I also have a small AC Infinity fan, always pushing air into the bottom of the tents. Then I have a larger one for exhaust on the top, vented and hooked up to the temp and humidity sensor. So that one only turns on if things get out of my ideal range and the smaller fan isn't bringing in enough. Then I use my Govee humidity and temp sensor that hooks up to Wi-Fi as well, so I can see my grow room's conditions from anywhere, and it will send me a notification if things get out of whack. So then by hooking up my lights to these smart Wi-Fi outlets, I can turn them off from anywhere, and I also use those to set my timers. So if for some reason the fans and the AC can't keep up, or if something goes wrong because of a change in season, I can turn off some lights to cool things off in the grow room no matter where I am, and maintain the right climate until I can get back to fix things properly. I also have a large humidifier that has 4 diffusers and a 5-gallon reservoir, as well as a dehumidifier designed to cover a whole house. Between all these things, I dial in my room to pretty much keep the ideal temp and humidity range, but in New England we get drastic temp swings outside, which then makes it hard to set it and forget it. But if things go out of whack, I'll get a notification right to my phone and I can make adjustments to save my crop. Pretty much everything that I use is in my bio, and also if you guys are looking to get into growing, I got my super soil recipe and all kinds of and I also have a link for all the seeds that I used in my most recent grows. You can check those out below. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. If you have the time, please support me on Patreon. Let's see what I say here. Something. Please don't forget to give a thumbs up on this video, guys, and subscribe if you found anything useful. Also, don't forget that most of this channel is unmonetizable. I believe knowledge should be free, so I offer everything I know at no cost. So I appreciate the support from those who can afford it on Patreon to help me keep this channel going. The link to my Patreon is in the description of every video. I'll be offering some useful stuff there, like a file for my favorite VPD chart and other useful tricks that can be found in my videos, but may be hard to screenshot from YouTube. I also offer help to anyone who asks, whether it's on Patreon, YouTube, or Instagram, or whatever, so don't be shy. The stupidest question you can ask is whether you should ask a question or no. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm still learning too, so I always appreciate any tips or tricks that you may have to improve my style. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay up, buds. This time we'll just drink some tea. Keep it PG-13.